Yeah. Hi. Okay, great. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all and super excited to be here today. So like Danelle said, I'm a planner at a firm called Process. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what I do and how I got there and what planning means to me. So let me just get this on present. Okay. All right. Are you guys all seeing this?
Yep, we can see it.
Yep. Okay. So yes. Hello, everyone. Really nice to meet you and nice to be here. So this is just what I'm going to talk about, and we may not get through all of it, and we can jump into questions, and happy to answer any questions you might have when we get there. But I'm going to talk about what is urban planning and community engagement for me. What is Process, the place that I work? What are some of the tips that I've learned about how young people can shape their cities, and kind of how I got there and got into this work? So I saw that Danelle did a land acknowledgement. That's great. And I wanted to put one here too, because like she mentioned, we're gathering online, but we are all on land. And it's important for us when we're doing planning work, and also just when we're gathering, to consider whose land that we're on. So for me, as a planner, it's really important to consider that each city and town across Canada has been shaped by colonialism and systemic violence against Indigenous people. And that is something that's ongoing today. And so as a planner, I think that it's my responsibility to really take responsibility for the exclusionary ways that decisions about cities have often been made. And this applies to, whether we're thinking about gathering on the smallest piece of land or how a building gets designed. It's important for us to first start with whose land we're on and work from there. So what is urban planning and community engagement? So this may be familiar to all of you who've been doing urban projects, but if you've walked through a park, taken public transit, or biked to work or to school, interacted with a neighbor on your street, or been curious about how a city is becoming more environmentally friendly, all of those things are kind of part of urban planning, or planners have considered all of those decisions and experiences. So planners work on the systems that define how we live together in our shared cities, our shared communities, and they really think about how we're going to share this land that we all live on. So there's different sectors that you can work in as a planner. There's lots of different roles, and I've kind of listed up some roles and some examples here to get you thinking about kind of the wide scope of what a planner might do. So, if you might work in the private sector, which means you'll be working for a company to, for example, build housing. Or you might work in consulting, which means you give advice on how a city could build new housing, on new transportation systems, how a policy might work better, or how our neighborhoods can be designed better. Or you might work in community engagement, meaning you bring people into those processes. You might have any of these roles working in government as well. So you might help with building housing for your city or for your province. You might work on making transit systems better, or you might create policy that defines where we live or where we shop or how we get from place to place. And then in the nonprofit sector, you might be advocating. If you're someone who's really passionate about a particular urban issue, you might be working in the nonprofit sector advocating for things like better affordable housing, safer bike lanes, improved parks, or you might be working in community development, which means helping people to sort of harness the power that they have in themselves to get involved in urban issues. So this is just sort of a few. I wanted to list out a couple examples, but planning is a really wide umbrella. So planning has a history of being a little bit exclusionary sometimes. The way that planning used to be understood kind of in the 50s and onwards, and when cities were really popping up in North America, is that planning kind of looked like this. You would have potentially a table of often white men, who were seen as experts, making decisions about what a city should look like, and then plopping those decisions down onto the ground and seeing how communities use them. So this was what we would call a very top-down process, where the planners were really understood as the only experts in a city, and a lot of decisions were made that community members didn't have a voice in. So there was kind of not very little process of consultation in an original planning model. Now it's shifted a lot for many of us, and a lot of planners feel that planning should look like this. So these are some examples of some collaborative processes that we've done to really involve people in the planning decisions that affect them. So where I work, a firm called Process, we really believe that collaboration, so working together with people in our communities, is the way that we can decide how to make a city better. So here in these photos, for example, I have on the left is a chalkboard where we had people weigh in on what would make a park experience better for them. We have some art projects where participants have been actually building with clay what their ideal city would look like. And then on the bottom here, a mapping project where I worked with a neighborhood resident to map out his daily experiences in the area and think about how they could be better. So for me, and for some of us in planning at this point, we really think a lot about how to make inclusive processes, because we think that involving people in inclusive processes is how we're ultimately going to make our city better. And by viewing people as experts in their own different experiences, we can really make sure that we're designing inclusive places for everyone. So, this comes from this idea that cities are democratic places. So I work in public engagement, meaning that most projects you work on, whether you are building a new train or designing a new house, there will be a community engagement component, meaning that it's essential that the public is consulted on the issue that affects their life on this project, and that consultation is integrated into the project's outcome. So that's where Process comes in on a lot of projects, is on the community engagement side. So we're a team of urban planners, designers, and artists. We believe that collaborative, creative, and transparent processes result in the most meaningful outcomes. And we sort of facilitate those processes on all kinds of different urban projects. We also love to work with artists to help us work together. And we think that art's a really powerful tool to help us have new and exciting discussions about our cities. So this was when we went skating earlier this winter as a team. And here's some of our team. So I'll share a bit about our principles. There are some of the principles that we think help lead to inclusive and exciting urban planning. So we really like to prioritize inclusive and equitable engagement that encourages a diversity of voices to be heard. We like to encourage creative and welcoming community engagement opportunities. We like to support local community networks and collaborations, meaning that we know that there's all kinds of community projects already happening, and we like to figure out how we can work with what's already going on. And we like to communicate the process in transparent, accessible, and educational ways, understanding diverse experiences. So if that does feel a little abstract, I thought I'd share an example of a project I've been working on recently to help you see how this plays out. So recently, we've just completed a project on the new Visitor Learning and Community Center at Rouge National Urban Park. So some of you may be familiar with the park. It's in Scarborough and Pickering, a really big park with a beach and forest and all kinds of different things you can explore. And they're building a new visitor center to welcome people in the park, help people understand what the park is about, and also help foster stewardship in the park. So Rouge is a really exciting place because it's Canada's first national urban park. So there's other national parks that we may have heard of, like Banff or Jasper, but this is the only one that's based in a city. And of course, a city like Toronto, the GTA, that's so diverse, there's lots of opportunities for a diversity of people to shape this center. So at Process, we help design and facilitate a creative process, participatory communications and engagement process to gather feedback on the design, get people's ideas on the design, and visitor experience programming of the new space. So what we did, I thought I'd break down our process a little bit. So we created a web page to tell people about the project and what it would be. We had on-site activations. So we invited people to the Rouge and showed them what the concepts looked like and created sort of fun games for them to play to weigh in on what they liked the most. We had an online survey where we had people share their opinions and perspectives. We had co-design workshops where we worked with specific groups that had an impact or had a role in the creation of the park, and also those that hadn't been able to make it to the park before, to ask them about how this center could really meet their needs. And then we had one-on-one interviews to ask people the same question. And when we went through this process, we were able to learn some really interesting things that we wouldn't have found out otherwise. So we learned that it's important to recognize the Indigenous presence on the site. In that presence, not just as a history or a story of the past, but presence that's here right now. We learned it was important to embed representation into all elements of the project. So to feel safe and to feel welcome, many people that we spoke to said that they want to see themselves and their communities and their cultures reflected in the park. And that's through signage, through art, and through who gets hired. And we also learned that it's important to view sustainability through an equity lens. So I know we often talk about sustainability in terms of things that can be done to potentially minimize waste on a site. But we also heard from some people who might have income barriers or other barriers that this kind of sustainability language around what we can do can often feel inaccessible. So we learned that it's important to make sure that whenever we're talking about sustainability, we ensure we're doing it from considering all kinds of different lenses and perspectives with the aim that, or the framing that everyone has something to share and contribute in this area. So how can young people shape their cities? I know that you all are very engaged young folks and are doing all kinds of projects that will make your city better. There's a couple of things that I've learned about sort of perspectives to consider when we're starting projects or starting to think about how to get a project going that can help it really get started from a good foundation. So, of course, like I mentioned at the beginning, we can really start by considering what land we're on. So we can start by asking, if we don't already know, which territory we're on. Native-land.ca is a place that we can go to wherever we are, learn about whose land that is, and start to learn about that particular group's history and current experience. We can also review the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action to help us understand more about our own role in reconciliation and really keep that in mind when we start to design our projects. And then broadly, we can find out who is in our community. So you might have been living in a place for your whole life, or you might have been living there for 1 year, but no matter how long you've been in a place or how well you know it, we really only know a place from our own perspective. And while that's extremely valuable, when we're starting to think about how we want to make a difference in our city and community, we can start by mapping out the people and the organizations that live and spend time in our community. And we might be surprised what perspectives we haven't been considering or who we have never heard from or met so far. So I created this kind of blob of some of the people that are in a community ecosystem. So we might have, for example, our local businesses, We might have people that speak different languages from us. We might have people of different ages, people with diverse abilities, people that are currently unhoused, school organizations, other community groups. So really just think about who are we missing when we think about our community, and how can we learn more about those folks' perspectives? So I'll just talk a little bit about my experience. This is it kind of in 4 bullet points. But yeah, unlike you guys, I didn't know so much that I was going to be going into this urban world when I was in high school. I did know, though, that I really loved stories and storytelling. I knew that I loved talking to people and meeting new people. And I knew that I did really care about my neighborhood. And so for me in high school, that led me to go into journalism. Because I wanted to kind of chase stories and find out what was happening around me. And this was a great way to do it. So I went from my high school in Toronto to King's College in Halifax and studied journalism. From there, I did a bit of like news coverage at CBC in Halifax, and did like really, really small stories, and then eventually landed at a startup doing community engaged journalism in Vancouver, meaning, again, I got to really work with people and find out what issues mattered to them, and how they would like to shape what stories or what information they needed to be able to shape their own communities and cities. And so there I learned a lot about different people's diverse experiences of the city and what issues they were really passionate about. And that led me to go back to school and complete my master's in planning. And I've worked at a couple of different organizations that are doing planning work, but for me, it is really about, planning can be about all kinds of technical things, but for me, it's really about how do we find ways to create more inclusive tables for a discussion and incorporate more people into the decisions that matter most to them. So I do that at work, and I also do that in my neighborhood in Parkdale. I'm lucky to be involved in a bit of community initiatives around planning, and that's really exciting for me. So that's it. I know I've just had not too long to get into things, so I would love if anyone has any questions, and we can go from there.